All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Today, I am joined by Chris Barakat. Chris, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, dude. So, for the listeners who might not know, can you just give us a quick breakdown of who you are and what you're up to right now?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll try to keep it brief. So essentially, I'm a full-time online coach, primarily focused on dealing with physique athletes. I'm a natural bodybuilder myself, competitive athlete since 2011 in that space. And I also teach at the University of Tampa as an adjunct professor over there. And I do a lot of research in the human performance lab. So basically, all the research that I'm a part of is related to bodybuilding in some sort of way, whether it's improving strength and performance or improving body composition or a combination of the two. Um, and yeah, that's a really short snippet of it. Like I said, I've been competing in bodybuilding since 2011, and over the last decade or so, everything I've been doing is always revolved around training and nutrition.
Love it, man. So, the main reason I brought you on the show today is to talk about body recomposition, the process of it's usually defined as losing or building muscle and losing fat at the same time. Now, before we dive into that, can you just give us a quick breakdown on like what kind of makes you an expert on this? Because I know like you've literally wrote the book, so to speak, on body recomposition. Can you just give us a quick background on that as well?
Yeah, for sure. Well, essentially, when I first got into the research field, I used to take information that was being shared through other experts in the fitness industry as black and white. This is good, this is bad, kind of thing.
Right.
And once I got involved with data collection myself, I started realizing that there's a huge gray area
Right.
because I was in graduate school, involved with my first training study that was investigating autoregulation of exercise selection. And what we were seeing was each individual was responding extremely different from one another, even though their training was exactly the same.
Right.
And their diet was extremely similar in terms of like protein intake and calories per pound of body weight and stuff like that. So I was like, huh, this is super interesting. And that first study, we've had, I think, 4 to 6 of those subjects did go through a body recomposition phase, so to speak. And a lot of the other subjects didn't. You know, some of them gained fat, some of them lost muscle. So I started seeing everybody respond differently. And being involved with coaching, you know, I would see some clients kind of hit it out of the park, have a really amazing body composition transformation, while other clients progressed at a much slower rate, or it took a lot more trial and error to really get the needle moving with them. So,
Right.
yeah, man, essentially over the year, just being involved in the lab, I kept seeing this more and more. And, you know, this is an opportunity for me to actually have concrete data on it. My second investigation that I was a part of in regards to like a randomized control trial was in female college volleyball players.
Okay.
And, you know, these people aren't extremely highly trained, but it's not like they've never lifted before. You know, a lot of them have been lifting for 3 to 4 plus years. They do more strength and conditioning work. It's not like they're training for hypertrophy. But in that study, we were investigating velocity-based training. Um,
Interesting.
and they also were working with a registered dietitian and a sports nutritionist. So they had a lot more nutritional hands-on help during that time period. And those results were insane. The study was only 7 weeks long. And when you looked at group averages, they lost a little bit over 5 pounds of fat mass and gained a little bit over 5 pounds of lean body mass in
So,
just 7 weeks.
right.
So I was like, oh, wow. And then looking at some of the outliers in that study where some of these girls, you know, gained like 8 pounds of lean mass and dropped 10 pounds of fat mass in just 7 weeks. So I was like blown away. Right.
Right.
But it was really cool to have that data in front of me. So I kind of kept diving down that rabbit hole. And then in 2019, Jeff Nippard approached me and, you know, told me he was really interested in doing something regarding body composition. And we just started shooting the shit. And I started kind of continuing to dig through the research that I wasn't personally a part of, just looking at previous published scientific literature. And I kept seeing this over and over, but most people in the evidence-based space weren't talking about body recomposition, or the common zeitgeist is it only happens in novice untrained people or overweight and obese people.
Right.
But when going through the literature, I just started seeing a lot of different results pointing in the direction that this does occur and it can occur. So yeah, man, it was a pleasure to work with Jeff on that book, and it's been a great guide to help.
Perfect. Perfect. That is very, like, basically like you explained there. Sorry, you broke up on me there a bit at the end, but
Oh, you're good.
basically very, very, you've done a ton of research on this. You've broken down a ton of research on this. And again, you literally helped write the book on body recomposition. Like you said, it's generally put out there that, like, hey, the only people that can build muscle and lose fat at the same time are those that are detrained, haven't trained, or again, like the obese. But what you're saying is this is a scenario that you see happen a lot more frequently than most people will say, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And most recently, to give you guys a little bit of context, this past month, August of 2020, our research review paper was just published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning, and that was a review paper on body recomposition, and it was the first one ever that even mentions those words, body recomp. So I think it's super cool. And that was a collaboration with myself, my buddy Jeremy Pearson, my mentor Dr. Eduardo de Souza, and then a lot of people know Dr. Bill Campbell from USF, which is up the street here in Tampa, and then also my buddy Dr. Guillermo Escalante out in California. So that was awesome. And you know, besides writing the Ultimate Guide to Recomp book, like the ebook, and getting that information out there, it was really cool to actually work on a peer-reviewed published paper and get this out into the scientific community, so to speak. So I was really grateful for that opportunity, and I'm just really excited to see where kind of things go from here.
That is dope that you're kind of like a pioneer in this, like something that hasn't been studied a ton. That's super cool, man.
Trying, man, trying.
I
Thanks.
love it.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Do you see like a couple different most common scenarios where body recomposition happens? Because I'm sure you have like bring on clients that are coming from like very different backgrounds, very different physiques, but that are capable of composite, like a body recomp. Do you see like two or three, like, okay, these are the most common, like, okay, this client's coming in with this body type or like this training history, this is where it happens?
Sure, 1,000%. So the less amount of total resistance training experience you have, the greater likelihood that you can recomp 100%. And the more body fat that you're currently starting off with, the greater likelihood that you can recomp. That is what we have seen in the scientific literature. And that's what just makes sense, right? The kind of the further away you are from your genetic limit and your maximum potential, the more you have to gain, right? And the faster that you can make that progress. But it's really interesting because there are outliers that kind of might only have one of those scenarios. So I want to share with you one outlier from one of our training studies.
Perfect.
This training study was looking at different training volumes in really well-trained individuals. It was published in 2020. I'm trying to think of the exact year, the exact month. I forget, but the head author is my buddy Dan Aube. So it's Aube and colleagues, and it's looking at essentially different training volumes. The study inside the lab, they were just training legs inside the lab. So when we reported like how much muscle they gained, we only reported how much muscle they gained in their quads and their hamstrings and their glutes. So we utilized the DEXA scan, but we utilized this tool called region of interest, and we just looked at the amount of lean mass they gained from their knee to their hip, right? Because whatever else happened to their upper body wasn't necessarily related to the training that they were doing in the study. Long story short, one subject came in, he was a basketball player. He was 8.5% body fat to start via DEXA. Okay, so super lean basketball player, okay? And he fit the criteria to be a participant in the study because you needed to squat at least 1.75 times your body weight,
right?
Which isn't crazy, but it's clearly, it's a solid number, right? So he was a basketball player that had resistance training experience in a strength and conditioning realm. He was doing basketball style workouts, mainly full body training, basic stuff with a barbell. He's never done like true hypertrophy training.
Right.
Now, the crazy thing is this subject that came in at 8.5% body fat, he gained like 18 pounds of lean body mass throughout his entire body, and he lost fat mass.
Damn.
So this is, yeah, it was just the craziest transformation I've ever seen. Okay. Absolutely insane. Probably, top tier genetics,
Right.
Incredible athlete with no true hypertrophy resistance training experience,
Right.
but is familiar with lifting weights, knows how to squat, knows how to bench press, so on and so forth. And that was just the craziest transformation I've ever seen. And seeing stuff like that. Now, I never want to tell people, hey, you're also going to gain 18 pounds of lean body mass. It's absolutely insane, right? But I also don't want to tell people, hey, you're really lucky if you gain 2 to 3 pounds of lean mass in the entire year.
Right.
Because at that point, it's like, if they go in with that expectation and that's their belief, two things might happen. A, they might not even be motivated to try anymore because that doesn't sound exciting enough, right? Those results aren't motivating enough in itself. And then B, if that's their expectation, I truly believe like that's going to be a limiting component in regards to how much progress they actually do make.
100%.
So I like to have realistic expectations, but also I'm not trying to shoot someone in the foot before they get started, because we don't know who has top tier genetics. We don't know what someone's truly capable of until they A, give it their best effort, and B, start kind of crossing all their T's and dotting all their I's.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So then taking it back to like these most common scenarios where you see it in, then is there, so it sounds like in that case, dude was super lean, but he also built a ton of muscle and got even leaner.
Mm-hmm.
So then typically it's thought too, like past a certain like body fat percentage, body fat floor, so to speak, it's very like nearly impossible to build muscle. Like I know for me personally, for the longest time, anytime I would go into a cutout, it's like, well, fuck it. Like, I guess I'm not going to gain muscle for the duration of this cut. And I know like even speaking to the mindset piece of it a little bit, for me, like when I actually saw some of the research on that, like completely like flipped the switch for me. And I did like actually make way more progress in my cuts as well. So I can definitely speak to that as well.
That's
but
awesome.
It sounds like here, basically what you're saying is this dude was lean. He was already relatively well-trained, and maybe not like in a hypertrophy aspect, but he was already well-trained. So that's definitely not a limiting factor. Like I think most people would think that's probably the least common scenario where it happens, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was lean, but I would consider him a skinny athletic build. You know what I'm saying, to start. And he was trained where he was very competent at squat, bench press, all the barbell movement patterns through strength and conditioning with a college basketball team. You know what I'm saying? So he knew what weightlifting was. It's not like he's never been into the gym, but at the same time, I would not consider him a bodybuilder. You know, it's not like he's been bodybuilding training for 3 to 5 years. He's just been in and out of the gym, weight training as a means to complement his sport. But man, it's just, again, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot before you even get started. And
Exactly.
Yeah, it's super, super impressive.
I couldn't agree more, man.
Yeah.
And I feel like one of the most common scenarios that I see a body recomp in, like that people wouldn't typically expect, is like the individual that comes on into coaching, they've already been working their ass off, but they've been doing something like CrossFit. Or for example, I have a dude that he just started coaching with me, but he was doing Orange Theory. Like, dude worked so hard. He was trying very hard to eat clean, but he didn't have specific macros. He didn't actually know where his calories were. And he had been doing Orange Theory like 6 days a week. So we got him. He's basically following like a functional bodybuilding style of training. So basically more geared towards hypertrophy. His macros are on point. And dude has recomped like crazy.
Yeah.
I see the exact same thing too. And like a lot of CrossFitters that come on, again, they've been like working very hard. But kind of like you mentioned there, like training might not have been geared so much towards just hypertrophy. So when we switch to like, okay, now you still have the ability to put on a lot of lean muscle.
Yeah.
Or like maybe your nutrition wasn't super specific. Then again, like I think that's another situation where people wouldn't think that you're capable of recomp, but you very much are.
Oh, 100%, 100%. So in regards to the clients I work with, a few things happen right off the bat. A, we improve their training approach where they're being more efficient with their time and their effort in the gym. And then B, we totally kind of revamp their nutritional approach
Right.
And it's typically increasing protein. It's even comes down to increasing their meal frequency. So I know a lot of people say, oh, if you eat, as long as you eat the proper amount of protein on a daily basis, doesn't matter if you have 2 meals per day or 6 meals per day. I
Right.
personally disagree with that, from what I see with my clients and what some of the research has pointed towards. And yeah, man, I mean, there's always more variables that you can improve. So you need to ask yourself, okay, my effort is where it needs to be, but how has my training progress actually been? Am I getting stronger? If you're not getting stronger, you need to assess why you're not getting stronger and then fix that. And then B, from a nutritional standpoint, if you don't even know how many calories you're eating and what your protein's at, I mean, you have to start there. And then you have so many other variables that you can improve upon, but you need to at least start with that, you know? So
Right.
let's just say you do have your calories in a good spot and you do have your protein in a good spot. Then you can start talking about like, okay, well, what's my meal frequency look like? Am I getting 3 protein feedings a day, or am I getting 4, 5, or 6? What's my pre-workout nutrition looking like? Am I ensuring that I'm going into this training session, you know, well fed and with the proper amount of fuel and the right fuel sources to really make sure that I sustain energy throughout this entire workout and that I can perform my best? And then B, what am I doing post workout to really start that recovery process, not only right away, but also am I maximizing my recovery capabilities, you know?
Right.
And then another super important variable is sleep. Am I getting 5 to 6 really poor quality hours in, or am I getting, you know, a solid 8 hours of sleep a night? So once you start combining all of those things, you start kind of aligning all the tools in your toolbox to have body recomposition be a more likely outcome for you.
100%.
Yeah.
And I know, at least as far as my coaching service goes, and I'm guessing you've probably seen this a ton as well, I feel like most everybody that comes on will recomp at least for a bit. Because again, I feel like for most people, it's the first time you've been focused on like all of these details at the same time. Like I know for me, I'll speak from my personal experience. I know we mentioned before, like talking about our mutual acquaintance, Cody McBroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I first hired him as a coach like 3 years ago, I had already been training for 7 years, but I was very much like, okay, like I'm not having that much fun with my training. I'm sleeping 5 to 6 hours a night. Just like you're saying there, like total protein feedings, like my total
Yeah, yeah,
protein across the course of the day and nutrient timing isn't that important.
yeah, yeah,
Then when I started, I was like, all right, dude, I'm all in. Like I'm sleeping 8 hours a night, non-negotiable. All my
yeah,
macros are on point, pre-workout, post-workout nutrient timing,
yeah,
crushing in my training, and I recomped like crazy. I got a
yeah,
lot leaner. I built a lot more muscle. So again, I feel like it's like, and this is very much like if a client comes in trying to chase like, hey, I want to recomp. Okay, we
yeah,
need to be a lot more focused on the details, even if it's just like that gets you more bought into the process. I feel like that
sure.
brings about such better results than just like you're saying like, okay, hit your overall calories and protein, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, 100%, man. So this is the thing. A lot of my niche market, so to speak, is competitive natural bodybuilders.
Right.
Um, and I'm not saying that if you've been crossing your T's and dotting your I's for the last 10 years that you're going to recomp. And I'm not saying that should be
100%.
your goal.
More than
However, the majority of people that go to a commercial gym, they're not crossing their T's, they're not dotting their I's. And there are so many things that they could do that kind of align with that typical bodybuilding lifestyle.
right.
And the more that they do that, the better their body composition outcomes are going to be. And I mean, I genuinely think it can be really common and doable or realistic for so many people because they're leaving a lot of low hanging fruit, you know, out on the table. There's plenty of that for them to catch.
100%. And I would say to add to that, like if you haven't had your training, your nutrition, and your recovery like all on point at the same time for
Yeah.
a good period of time, you're probably again like leaving a lot on the table.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I'd like to mention is like, I think a lot of people go wrong where if their primary goal is fat loss, so a lot, like basically everyone wants to build muscle and lose fat at the same time, right? Like that's the holy grail. That's everyone's goal at the end of the day. But what I see is a lot of people kind of prioritize fat loss as their first goal and muscle building as their second goal. So what I commonly see is a lot of people jump into a calorie deficit right off the bat. So they have this training plan in place and they put this diet together to help them reach their goals. And they start off with a calorie deficit because they know that's going to, best lead to the greatest fat loss results.
Right.
However, what that does is it's going to slightly decrease their ability to build muscle and improve their training performance. And more importantly, it's also going to decrease their ability to adhere to the plan,
Right.
because their hunger cues are going to go up at some point. And your body kind of just senses that deficit as a threat, depending on where you start off at.
Right.
So what I often do is have a lot of my clients start off at theoretical maintenance
Okay.
and just focus on improving their macronutrient ratios throughout the board, and then improve upon their nutrient timing, their meal frequency, and all these other variables. I just kind of called it like good habit building.
Right.
So focus on building those habits. And then we can kind of choose like, okay, you're in this position, let's go into a surplus and let's start to actually intentionally want to gain weight, or okay, let's go into a deficit and I actually want to start seeing the scale trend downward. But I like starting people off at maintenance and focus on developing really good habits, and then kind of go in one direction or the other if even necessary.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. And on that note, let's dive into nutrition a little bit, man. So it sounds like almost always then if somebody's coming in like, yo, I want to recomp, I think I'm very capable of it. It sounds like most of the time you're going to start them in a maintenance phase, correct?
For the most part, yeah. I determine what theoretical maintenance is, and then based on their 7-day averages, to see if that theoretical maintenance is holding to be true,
Right.
depending on their actual execution and adherence. And yeah, man, I mean, basically take it from there. Super important for them to take circumference measurements. So a lot of times what happens is their scale weight stays essentially the same, plus or minus 1 or 2 pounds up or down, or literally like spot on right in the middle.
Right.
And their circumference measurements go down. So that's a great sign, like, hey, your waist is getting smaller. You're probably losing some body fat, even though that the scale is staying the same. So you have nothing to panic about. We're kind of doing exactly what we want to do. Let's keep it up.
100%. I couldn't agree more, man. I feel like that's such an overlooked piece. And I feel like that's what people like get bummed out. Feel like they're not making progress. Is just strictly tracking scale weight when it's like, yo, no, you're actually crushing it. Are there any situations where you would start someone in a deficit right out of the gate?
For sure. If they're obese, like genuinely obese or heavily overweight,
Right.
I'll start them off in a deficit right away. And that's not going to, it's honestly not going to hinder their muscle building abilities at that point, as long as protein's high enough, because they have so much extra energy reserves from their fat stores that they can still build muscle in that period.
Okay. And then it sounds like most people you're starting in a maintenance phase, they're focusing mostly on building, changing habits, etc. From there, like for the relatively lean individual, so let's say like someone comes on there about 15%, or let's say like your typical, they come on there feeling kind of skinny fat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like we could talk about like, okay, here's how we're kind of like periodizing your nutrition, so to speak. Is it mostly like a maintenance phase? We're taking advantage of like 3 to 4 months of gains and then go into a cut to like get rid of that last bit of fat, or how do you structure that typically?
Yeah, man. So if someone's skinny fat, I focus on the word skinny more than I focus on the word fat.
Like
That means that they have a greater potential to build muscle because they're so far away from like their maximum potential. Right. So I try to focus on strength performance, getting them stronger in the gym, getting them to really enjoy chasing the logbook to a certain extent, where they're more excited about benching 225 instead of 145. And they're really excited to train hard than they are about like, oh, I still have, unwanted fat around my love handles. If you can kind of just shift their focus to like, I'm getting strong and this is really fun, let's keep doing it. I actually take them from maintenance into a slight surplus and focus on building muscle and maximizing that as much as we can, because I feel like at that point they should be able to gain more lean body mass than they do fat mass.
Right.
So as they gain, they should be able to lean bulk really, really well. And they should actually like the way their physique looks as they're gaining weight, because that ratio of lean mass to fat mass is favoring the lean mass gains. And, their body fat percent can be going down even though they're not losing fat mass.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. So what about the individual that comes on? They are relatively well trained, but maybe they haven't had their nutrition on point. So like they've been following the smart training program for a long time. They maybe haven't had their nutrition as on point. So they're probably just a little bit fluffier than need be. Would you say like, let's again start you at maintenance, and you probably have even more ability to build because your nutrition hasn't been dialed in, even though like you probably have a good amount of mass? Or maybe in that case, we push to get leaner. Any like recommendations there?
Yeah, it's always like a give and a take depending on how set they are on losing body fat.
Sure.
If someone's really focused on like, hey, I really, really want to cut, then hey, let's do that. It might be a pretty shortcut. It might be 6 to 8 weeks. Let's improve your body composition, get you into a spot where you are more, so to speak, insulin sensitive, and you kind of can tolerate carbohydrates more, and we can kind of start fueling your performance a bit better. That might motivate them to get into a better spot. And then once their body composition improves, now they actually might be able to make more progress at a faster rate because they are a bit leaner. And it can be actually healthier for them. So it totally depends, man. Like being too lean is very unhealthy hormonally, and being too heavy is very unhealthy hormonally too. So some people that, again, this depends on their starting point, but some people that are heavy and have a high percent of body fat, they can have really poor sleep, and they can have just poor mood and poor motivation. So if getting them a little bit leaner improves their sleep, improves their motivation, that needs to be the first move. And then we could focus on really building muscle and quote unquote recomping as our second phase, if that makes sense.
Okay. So does this somewhat then tie into this idea of, now I know this so much depends because it's so variable. Like, how did you measure your body fat? It's hard to actually know if you're within this range anyways. But like for a long time, you'd hear people talk about the P ratio, right? Like this is where we get the most optimal nutrient partitioning, like 10 to 15% for men, 15 to 25% for women. Does that kind of tie into this?
Yeah, I would say so. And everyone's set point's slightly different. So it's going to vary. But like for me, I know it is between honestly as low as 10 and as high as 14. Once I go above 14, I feel like I don't gain any muscle and I just get fatter at that point. And then once I'm below 10, I'm basically just preserving my lean mass to the best of my ability. And I'm not really expecting to gain lean mass if I'm below 10. So right now I'm pushing calories personally, and I'm probably around 12 and a half ish. Right. And I'll push up to 14, 15, and then I'll trim it back down. But yeah, it depends for everyone. And then for females, I would say the 15 to 25 is a little bit on the low end. I would say most females feel really good between 18 on the lower end and 28% ish on the higher end.
Okay.
Yeah. For like athletic physique competitors in their off season.
Right. Okay.
Sure.
Perfect. So as far as setting up macros go, protein, do you have a specific like, okay, we're probably going to aim for this many grams per pound of body weight?
Yeah, 1,000%, man. So in the guide, we have protein on a sliding scale. Okay. And what I typically recommend is the scale goes from 1.2 grams of protein per pound of lean body mass all the way up to 1.6 grams of protein per pound of lean body mass. And the more body fat you have, the lower your protein needs are. Okay. And then the leaner you are, the closer to that 1.6 range you need to get. And a lot of people ask, well, hey man, I really don't know what my body fat percent is. I don't know how to test it. If you're off by 5%, you're totally fine. And there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to guesstimate within a 5% ballpark. So you don't need to know if you're 12.5% or 12%. Right. You just need to know that you're between 10 and 15, if that makes sense. So I feel like as long as you can guesstimate what your body composition is, literally by looking at photos, or by doing skin caliper assessments, or by using a really cheap bioelectrical impedance. It'll give you something that should be within a 5% range. And
Okay.
then from there, you can kind of start off with your protein requirements. Yeah.
Okay.
And then one other thing I'll say about protein is, if I have a client come to me, let's say it's a female client, and they're used to eating 70 grams of protein a day, 60 grams of protein per day, like a very typical American kind of diet. I'm not going to tell them to eat 120 grams of protein overnight, just because I do think that's optimal for them.
Right.
I'll take them from 60 to 80, then 80 to 100, and then 100 to 120, just so they get used to adding in protein to their diet. So it's not something that you have to do overnight, but I do think that 1.2 to 1.6 grams per pound lean body mass is ideal for body composition purposes.
Okay. Okay. I love it. And definitely as far as the protein, I can speak to that as well. Like if a new client comes on and we need to double your protein.
Yeah.
I think one of the least effective things you can do is like right away bump it at that, but rather like, okay, what's your lowest meal in protein right now? I feel like for most people it's breakfast. How can we add another protein source there? And then just bumping it up from there. But
absolutely.
As far as ratio of carbs to fat go, do you have a preference, like typically higher carb, kind of balance? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So this is a little bit more context dependent, and that's super important. So generally speaking, the leaner you are and the more physically active you are, the higher carbs I kind of partition. And then the more sedentary you are and the higher your body fat levels are, the more fats you have and the less carbohydrates you have. So I actually set protein first. I set up calories first, utilizing something like the Mifflin St. Jour or the Harris Benedict, whatever it may be. Set up their calories first. Then I determine protein. And then based on their current body composition and their lifestyle, I determine fat. And I personally use percentages for fat. So I never go below 20% of their total calorie intake coming from fat. And I really never go above 35% of their total calorie intake coming from fat. And that's also on that same sliding scale. So if someone's extremely sedentary and they have a current high level of body fat, they might be close to that 35% of their total calories coming from fat. And then I fill in the rest of their calories from carbohydrate. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, if someone's leaner or just really physically active, they can have a kind of labor intensive job where they're constantly moving, then they're going to have less total calories coming from fat, closer to the 20 end range, and then more carbohydrate. But I think 25% fat is a really good sweet spot for a lot of people if they're not too sure. And then you can kind of adjust thereafter.
Super, super helpful. So basically you're saying set your protein needs, determine your fat needs, and then fill the rest of your calories with carbs.
1,000%.
Love it. As far as and it, again, like you said there, but I feel like we should probably drop a couple disclaimers in here too. Like this is all very much like, it does so much depend on the individual as far as they're capable of, the recommendations. So I'm glad you threw that in there as well. But then I wanted to dive into nutrient timing just a bit as well. So can you give us like just some general, okay, we probably want to be a little bit carb heavier here, a little bit fat heavier here, anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I'm actually an advocate for is having one meal per day primarily be protein, fat, and fibrous vegetable. A lot of people think that's super bro of me, but I do see merit there. And typically it's either the first meal of the day or the last meal of the day, but it depends on the time of day that you train and you exercise. So let's just take a standard American that works a normal 9 to 5 and then goes to the gym at 5:45, 6 p.m. after work. I really like starting off your day with a high fat, high protein, fibrous vegetable breakfast. So that can literally be like a vegetable omelet with whole eggs and egg whites or turkey bacon, whatever it may be. That's going to really keep them satiated for quite a few hours because they're having high fat, high protein and high fiber from the vegetables.
Right.
But it also kind of forces them to continue utilizing more fat as fuel. And I think that this can help with metabolic flexibility over time, where you just constantly program your body to do this day in and day out.
Right.
And I do genuinely think a lot of people in the States and in just modern society right now are a bit insulin resistant. If you look at people's resting blood glucose levels, fasting blood glucose levels, they're usually a bit elevated. So starting off your day like that can be advantageous. And you're not forcing your body to secrete a bunch of insulin with every single feeding. You know, if you have carbs in every single meal, you're forcing your body to do that over and over. So give your body a break. Have a high fat, high protein meal with fibrous vegetable at least one time a day. And then as your day goes on, you'll have your carbohydrate meals and like moderate fat, higher carb, higher protein, and go out throughout the day that way. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you kind of train early on in the day, maybe your final meal of the day is like a salad with a protein source or just fibrous vegetable, protein, and fat, if that makes sense.
Perfect. Again, super, super applicable. So as far as nutrition goes, last thing I wanted to ask you, for like that client that you're working with that is in a deficit, are you going to, but they're chasing recomp, are you going to implement more like diet breaks, refeeds, anything like that, or just a straight deficit?
For sure. I'm going to continue talking about nutrient time real quick just because I want
Oh,
to.
my bad.
No, you're good. I just want to provide the listeners with a little bit more nuggets that they can apply right away. So another thing to consider is I just want to talk about pre-workout and post-workout super quick because that can really benefit their performance and their recovery. So I just want to kind of talk about that for them real quick. In regards to pre-workout nutrition, I'm a really big fan of utilizing multiple transportable carbs. So that just means utilizing a starchy carbohydrate and a fruit source and pairing them in that meal. I typically use low glycemic carbs as my pre-workout carbohydrate source. That's going to keep your blood glucose levels a bit more stable. It's not going to have that spike and that crash. So it's going to prevent you from going hypoglycemic while exercising and just kind of feeling fatigued mid-workout. Also, it's going to lead to a little bit of more acute fat oxidation while you're actually training. So I really like doing that. An example would be doing like old-fashioned oatmeal with, blueberries or some sort of fruit, cut up apple or something like that.
Right. Okay.
And then obviously having your protein source with it.
Okay.
And then post-workout, I keep it kind of old school. Even though it's not super necessary to do like a high glycemic carb, if you're not training more than twice per day and you're just doing one training session like most of us, I still like utilizing high glycemic carbs. So it might be something like a Rice Krispie treat for me and a whey protein shake, something really simple, really fast to digest, and obviously getting in a full bolus of protein post-workout as well.
I love it. Again, man, I feel like all that's so applicable. And I know pre-workout, I typically love to do like berries mixed with oatmeal. I sometimes like to mix it with Greek yogurt as well, but always like some type of protein, like a whey protein in there as well.
Yeah, same, man. And depending on my timing, when my training session is, I usually add like a little bit of walnuts or a little bit of almond butter or a little bit of coconut flakes or something like that. Got a little bit of fat, but it's primarily carbohydrate, protein, and just a little bit of fat.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're applying that exact same, like pretty low fat, high carb, always relatively high protein post-workout, correct?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
So then going again to kind of to this client that's in a deficit, are you going to, like in the case of a recomp, are you going to implement more refeeds, more frequent diet breaks, anything like that, or just get the deficit over with?
Yeah, I mean, it always depends.
Right.
But I utilize refeeds and diet breaks pretty regularly. So I'll say, how much body fat does this client need to lose or want to lose and in what kind of time period? That's going to be a huge factor. So if someone needs to lose a significant amount of body fat and they're willing to do this, what I would say in a smart and safe way, so they're giving themselves enough time, I'll absolutely utilize diet breaks for them, for the psychological benefit as well as the physiological benefit. And it's something that when they know how long that this fat loss phase is expected to be and they have a realistic expectation, they can buy into, okay, I'm really excited for this longer process.
Right.
I'm also looking forward to having those periods of 5 to 7 to up to 14 days where I'm going to be eating closer to maintenance, if not at maintenance, and kind of taking my foot off the fat loss gas pedal and giving my body a time to recover from that stress alone. So yeah, man, I utilize diet breaks and refeeds pretty regularly, to be quite honest with you. Some people refeed once to twice per week. That can be on a higher physical activity day, or a weak body part training day, or a super high volume day, or even a day that, they just have more physical activity. And then I also utilize refeeds with my female clients very regularly post-menstrual cycle. So right after they get their period, from a hormonal standpoint, they're a bit more insulin sensitive. Their basal metabolic rate is slightly elevated. So they're burning more calories at rest, and they're able to utilize carbs a tad more efficiently. So I typically increase their carbs a bit and drop their fats a bit right around the end of their cycle.
That is super interesting.
Yeah. Week 2 of their follicular phase.
So like how much then is that an overall increase in calories, or are you just swapping carbs for fat?
It's a slight bump in calories. It could be up to 100, at least 50 calories higher, but sometimes even more than that, depending. Sometimes I even take diet breaks that entire week and just have their carbs higher. It depends on so many factors, but it's something to look into. A really good resource is Lyle McDonald's, I think it's just called The Woman's Book.
Great book.
Yeah. And he talks about that a bit there. So pretty cool stuff there.
Perfect. I feel like all that is super helpful. So as far as, do you feel like refeeds in themselves, outside of like the psychological components, do you feel like these are going to help people preserve or build more muscle mass in a deficit, or is it mostly just the psychological benefits that you're looking at?
I do think it's going to preserve more lean body mass while dieting. And it's pretty cool. Dr. Campbell out of USF, he just recently published a study that basically demonstrated those that were utilizing refeeds and diet breaks throughout a calorie deficit did preserve more lean mass and actually preserved their resting metabolic rate to a higher degree. So it's cool to see the evidence starting to come out and support these tools and techniques. I think it's going to come from a few reasons. When you're taking those refeeds and you're kind of refilling some of your glycogen stores, you're going to just have more water in your muscle cell, which is going to read as lean body mass to a certain extent. But B, it theoretically should help you maintain your strength performance, your strength endurance performance. So you're going into the gym, you're able to keep your volume higher, your volume load higher, and that should lead to you preserving more, right? Where if you're super fatigued and you're never getting those refeeds and your performance just continues to drop, how are you going to really hold on to that muscle mass if you're just kind of getting weaker and weaker over time? So yeah, I think it's a great tool, man.
100%. Perfect, dude. So as far as nutrition goes, before we move on, anything else you would like to touch on there? Anything else you feel is important?
No, man, just, if there's a variable that you can improve upon, try to make that adjustment to kind of cross that T or dot that I. And again, it can be as simple as right now you're doing 4 protein feedings per day. All right, let's try to increase it to 5. Maybe do an additional shake, right before going to bed. Maybe do a casein shake, or if you have 1 meal per day that's super low protein, get that to an adequate amount where you are maximizing muscle protein synthesis for that specific meal. It doesn't have to be a drastic change, but just find a hole in your diet that you can improve upon and make that improvement.
I love that, dude. Again, I think that's super applicable. So I wanted to dive into training real quick, and we likely won't have as much to go into because this is all very much, again, it depends on where you're coming from. Yeah. Are there some general, hey, these are typically the biggest things we shift, when somebody comes on board chasing a body recomposition?
It's just really surprising to me how many people don't track their lifts in the gym.
I couldn't agree more.
Right. So many clients come to me and they're like, yeah, I've been lifting for 3 to 7 years, for example. and they send me their training program, or they give me an idea of how much volume they currently do, or they're constantly changing up their exercise. You know, their split may stay the same, but they're kind of just going into the gym and winging it.
Right.
And they never ever track their lifts. They make so much progress alone just by doing that, and their workouts become more time efficient. So let's just say you're doing a leg extension machine, and you know that last week you did 120 pounds and 140 pounds for your true working sets. You don't need to go in the gym and like guesstimate, like, okay, what weight am I going to do today?
Right.
You know? And so many people, again, this is not for a hardcore competitive bodybuilder, which is a large percent of my niche, but so many people that go to the gym, they say, okay, I'm going to do XYZ exercise, and I'm going to do those exercises for 8 to 12 reps or 12 to 15 reps. And they just pick a load and they do those 8 to 12 reps, or they do those 12 to 15 reps, but they could have done 15 reps on the sets they're doing 12 with, and they could have done 20 reps on the sets they're doing 15 with. And it's like they're working so far away from failure that they're not creating enough of a stimulatory effect from the training session itself to induce the adaptation they're looking for, which is gains in strength and gains in size.
Right.
So, I mean, just look around at any commercial gym and take a look at someone's first rep and take a look at their last rep. If their concentric velocity is exactly the same, that means they're nowhere near their failing point, right? Like if they do their lat pull down at this speed and the bar is moving at this speed for their first rep, and their last looks the same as their first rep, they're so far away from failure that, like, how do you expect that that's going to stimulate a change?
Right.
So I think that's where just gen pop goes wrong. Not competitive athletes, but if you just go to your normal LA Fitness or Crunch Fitness or whatever it is, like that's what I see. Like everyone stops their set so far away from failure.
100%, man. And I feel I've even seen in clients that do maybe have a good understanding of like, here's how I use the RPE scale, or here's how I like track RIR. Still, like, no matter what, if you go in there, what you're doing, even if you're doing the same shit as you did last week or the last 8 weeks, it's still going to feel hard if you've been training for a couple of years. But like you're saying, like, it's so important to, okay, what did I do like this corresponding set last week? So let's say you're doing back squats. Okay, what did I do sets, reps, load last week? Okay, can I maybe like can I add another rep here? Can I add a little bit of load? But if you don't have a logbook, you're just going in and doing shit that feels, even like if it feels hard, it's very easy to like not make progress for a very long time training like that.
Absolutely. And something that I've recently changed over the past 12 months or so, 8 to 12 months, is my approach to my warm-up sets. Okay. I think early on in my training career, I wasted a lot of energy and essentially did a lot of junk volume with my warm-up sets. Okay. So let's just say I'm doing incline dumbbell chest press, just random examples. And my goal is to work with the 90s. Like those are my working sets. Okay. I would do like 50 pounds for 10, 60 for 8, 70 for 8, maybe 80 for 4. And then I would get into it. Now I'm doing a similar number of warm-up sets, but like I might do 50 for 10, 60 for 5, 70 for 2, 80 for 2, and then, okay, I'm ready for the 90s. So I'm conserving my energy on my warm-up sets. Right. So when I get to my true working set, I can attack it with more energy, more focus, and I'm not essentially pre-fatiguing myself before getting into my working sets. Because at the end of the day, it's those working sets that are going to actually change my physique and drive the adaptation I'm looking for. Right. So I think a lot of people go wrong there too.
Okay. Yeah. Again, I feel like that's super applicable. I'd probably fall on the other end of that spectrum. I love training. I hate any type of warm-up work. So I think I've probably underdone that a little bit as much as you've overdone that.
Gotcha.
As far as cardio goes, then you have actually one more thing on training. I feel like it's probably I know you touched on this a bit. it sounds like you typically, like you mentioned with that basketball player, if you haven't been training for hypertrophy, again, you have a very typically large ability to like add a lot of muscle more quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
100%. And then another thing I'll say with training, just again, speaking gen pop, and even more well-trained people, I see so many people not controlling the load throughout the entire concentric and the entire eccentric. You want your lifts to look like you are controlling the weight and the weight is not controlling you. So that means when you're squatting, as you're performing the eccentric, you know the rate at which that eccentric is happening because you're controlling how slow you're going down. You're not kind of just dive bombing
Right.
and letting the weight push you through the eccentric. Same thing with a bench press. The weight isn't just flying down to your chest because you're dealing with a heavy load. You know exactly how slow that bar is moving because you're in control of moving it, and then boom, you're pressing it. You're pressing it as explosively as you can with as much control as you can, and then the amount of weight you're utilizing is going to determine how fast that actually moves, right?
Right.
So if you're using your 10 RM, that first rep is going to move pretty quickly, but if you're using your 3 RM, it's going to move extremely slow.
Right.
But yeah, man, just being in control and just pausing in the fully shortened, fully contracted position, right? Like if you do a leg extension or a preacher curl, when you're at the top of the movement, when the muscle's fully shortened, pause for a slight second. Don't just start your eccentric and squeeze it there and feel the actual muscle working. I think if your goal is hypertrophy, you need to start thinking like, okay, my goal is to train this muscle. So I actually want to feel what's going on internally. I don't want to just move the weight from point A to point B because I'm not powerlifting and I'm not just trying to pick up this bar from the floor.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I think that shift in mindset is super important. And if you're a gen pop person and you don't have any competitive goals, but your goal is to improve your physique, then you should care about this even more because you shouldn't care about how much weight you're lifting.
Right.
Because you don't have a competitive, like you're not trying to show off to someone. You're just trying to take care of your body and build your physique, right? So A, you're going to reduce your risk of injury tenfold. And B, you're going to just get greater results. So it's like you should really focus in on dialing that form in and focusing on that internal mind muscle connection. It really makes a big difference.
I couldn't agree more, man. I know that was one of the biggest shifts for me. Like when I first learned, okay, volume, like if we want to define it as sets times reps times weight. Okay, I'm squatting and I'm going to sacrifice my range of motion. Like maybe I just barely hit parallel, but I put more weight on the bar. So that's more volume, right?
Yeah.
But if my goal is to build jack squads and I can actually like squat ass to grass, if I cut that weight by a good amount, then I'm stimulating my quads more. And like the weight on the bar isn't near, of course it's important, but like, I think too many people fall in that trap. So I know for me, one of the most helpful things has been really identifying, okay, where's my start and my end point of every single movement? So like when I squat, like, okay, hamstrings touch my calves. That's start or the end point, however you want to define it. But like we have these two checkpoints we hit, right? Because otherwise I know for me for the longest time, and I think this has been super helpful for my clients as well, was like, okay, I added weight this week or I added a rep this week, but then like, okay, my squat depth was like a little less. So it was another easy way to fake progress. I think those are also important things to think about.
1,000%, man. That's a great point you make. Something I want to share is we use volume load, so weight times reps times sets, as a objective way that is supposed to determine how much work you did. Right. It's a way that we objectify workload, but it's only a true measurement if that workload is staying standardized.
Right.
So if you did 10,000 pounds of volume with perfect form, and then you did 11,000 pounds of volume with perfect form, you did successfully progressively overload if your form was standardized.
Right.
After you did 10,000 pounds of volume with perfect form, and then you did 11,000 pounds of volume with shit form, on paper, you might think that the 11,000 pounds of volume was more total work, but in the reality, it probably wasn't, especially internally on the muscle.
Right.
My first study as the primary investigator, as the PI, head author, was looking at bicep training.
Okay.
And we had subjects, the same subjects come in 1 week. They did 9 sets of bicep curls on a cable column
Right.
with their shoulder at 0 degrees. And then the next week they came in and they did 3 sets with their shoulder extended, so their bicep was stretched, 3 sets neutral, and then 3 sets with their shoulder flexed.
Okay.
And we controlled intensity, so they had to be getting extremely close to failure on all of their working sets, but we didn't control volume.
Right.
And what ended up happening was their volume load was essentially exactly the same. There was no statistical difference between volume load between conditions, but the group that varied their shoulder joint angle had a significantly greater muscle activation.
Okay.
So that's, to me, that's an internal stimulus versus an external objectified workload. So even though volume load was equated, the internal signal that leads to hypertrophy, generally speaking, was greater when they varied their joint angle. So that can, give some benefits or allude to some benefits of varying your exercise selection in a very logical, evidence-based way. But yeah, it's not the same. What's happening internally to the muscle and how much volume you're doing doesn't always correlate with one another.
So interesting. And I'd love to have you on again and we could dive into this a bit more because I feel like that could straight up probably be a whole nother podcast.
For sure.
But as far as training goes, then do you mind diving into cardio real quick? I'm not sure how much more time you have, but I'd love to, as far as cardio recommendations, are you generally going to prescribe cardio for somebody? And I know, again, it depends. And then HIIT versus LISS, any take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to cardio, the most important thing is, why are we doing it? Is it as a tool to increase calorie expenditure, as a means to increase fat loss? Or are we doing it for the goal of, hey, this person wants to improve cardiovascular health,
right?
And maybe they have some sort of issue going on. So I'm personally a bigger fan of both ends of the extreme when it comes to cardio. I typically do LISS or I do HIIT. Personally, I'm not someone who does medium intensity steady state for a long period of time. So I'm not going to jog at a relatively high intensity for extended periods of time. But I actually did fasted cardio this morning. I did 30 minutes on the elliptical at between 120 and 130 beats per minute.
Okay.
So I consider that low intensity. Some people consider just walking and taking steps as low intensity. I think it's important to kind of make that differential, because I don't think you're really going to get much cardiovascular benefit at all from just taking walks, so to speak. It's a good way to burn more calories, but I do think you will get some benefit of, being in that 60% of your heart rate max zone. Right. So I think that's important to determine. I do utilize cardio for my clients and for myself. And again, they're depending on their goal. For some of my sedentary lifestyle clients, even if they're not in a fat loss goal, I still have them do cardio a couple times a week just for overall health. I also think it can improve their recovery, which a lot of people argue with. They're like, oh, if you're adding in cardio, you're adding in another stimulus or another training mode that requires more recovery capabilities. Right. And that's true to an extent. But again, if you're doing low intensity work and you're kind of just getting total body blood flow and you're getting your body moving, you're increasing positive mood hormones like dopamine and serotonin, it could be a great way to start your day.
Right.
So you got to take all those things into consideration. During a contest prep, for people that are trying to get really shredded, I typically utilize a combination of HIIT and LISS. Okay. But yeah, there's so many variables that make it depend, Okay. Do you have any specific questions on cardio that I could answer?
So typically, as far as cardio goes, basically my question would be, when would you implement HIIT? Because I know, same as you're talking about here, aerobic work is generally going to be beneficial for most people, right? Like you talked
Yeah.
about, it's gonna like both from a fat loss perspective, it's going to help burn more calories, but also it's likely going to help your recovery. Like if you have a better aerobic system, you'll recover better between sets, between training sessions,
Yeah.
and even like tying into your nervous system a bit. Like you might be able to get back into a parasympathetic state quicker post training session.
Mhm.
So like so you said like your contest prep, like you're getting ready for a show you want to get shredded. Is implementing HIIT just out of necessity? Like, yo, we need to burn a lot of calories. We just don't have that much time, or like, what's the thinking behind that?
Yeah. So again, generally speaking, I actually start off some contest preps with more HIIT
Interesting.
and way less lists.
Okay.
And the goal there is to kind of increase their recovery capabilities, um, and get them in a position where they're they're recovering in between sets really well throughout their entire prep,
Right.
because we have increased their aerobic capacity so much by doing HIIT. And then as they get leaner and leaner, once their risk of losing muscle mass increases, I might pull HIIT out because it does require more fuel to recover from. And at that point, their calories are lower and lower, so their ability to recover is hindered. So
Right.
then I kind of transition into lifts. And then something that I do that a lot of evidence-based people don't do or don't talk about is fasted cardio.
Okay.
I still implement that for myself and some of my clients. And then there's a whole bunch of reasons there, but me and my colleague, Dr. Guillermo Escalante, we wrote another research review paper on that. So I'll send that over to you to check out
Yeah,
for
dude.
sure.
I would love to check that out because all this is
Yeah.
super interesting, and I feel like
Yeah.
again, this could be a whole nother podcast. That makes complete
Yeah.
sense though, what you're saying as far as starting off with HIIT and kind of tapering it to more like lists as the prep goes on. That's definitely a different approach that I've heard. And I've generally in the last couple of years fallen in the camp of like, and I work with a lot of gym pop clients, but generally like we
Yeah.
want to do more like lists, or we could consider it, it might not feel necessarily low intensity, but if we look at like aerobic versus anaerobic, yeah, you're primarily using your aerobic system here, right?
Yeah.
But that's super interesting. I feel like I want to be super respectful of your time, man. And this has all been super helpful, super applicable for everybody listening, I'm sure. Before I let you go, and I'll give you a chance to plug anything you want in just a second, is there anything else at all you want to add as far as it goes to a body recomposition, how to make it happen?
Man, I think we covered a lot. I had a great time chatting with you, and I appreciate you having me on here. One thing I'll say about the HIIT too, I think towards the end of a contest prep, there comes a point where you kind of just do whatever it takes. So just because I generally like to do HIIT early on and pull it out, there's plenty, if some of my clients are listening to me right now, like, damn, I was doing HIIT at the end of my contest prep. And, there comes a point where you just do whatever is needed to be done. And then when it comes to how you approach it with Gen Pop, I think it's really important to realize that even if you get a Gen Pop client from like 15% body fat to 8% body fat, and you get them in great shape for the summer or something like that, there's such a massive difference between 8% body fat and like 5% body fat for stage lean. So that's something else to consider. So, I mean, yeah, just all these variables come into play, man. And then in regards to body recomp, I think we covered most of it. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. Essentially, believe in what you're capable of and be honest with yourself. Assess your training, assess your nutrition, see what can improve, make those adjustments and get after it. And you'll be pleasantly surprised with the results you can make, or the progress you can make, I should say. Utilize tools like circumference measurements, utilize tools like skin calipers, and don't just rely on the scale.
Right.
When people get into bodybuilding type training, you'll be surprised how much more glycogen your muscles start to require and they start storing. So your scale weight, you can actually start gaining weight because you're storing more intracellular water as you're storing more glycogen. So many things go into body composition, and the scale is literally just one tool that's only measuring your total body mass.
Right.
And utilizing tools like the skin calipers or the waist circumference goes a long way. And even taking really consistent progress photos in the same lighting in the same spot can also be a great positive reinforcer and positive feedback to kind of keep you on top of your game and let you know that you are making progress. So keep up the good work, kind of thing.
I love it, man. So many nuggets throughout this whole podcast. This is such a great guide to body recomposition. Before I let you go, and again, I'm super appreciative of you being here, dude. Anything at all you would like to plug?
Yeah. So just for everyone that, wants to check out more of my content and get a better idea of things I do, definitely check out schoolofgains.com. Gains is spelled with a Z at the end. It's a little bit more anabolic that way.
I love
And on there, you will find, free blog articles, YouTube videos. Sometimes I do like a research review every time. And you'll also find all of my published research. You can access it there. You can find all the links to it there. And then you can look into some of my coaching services and stuff like that with my team and I. And that's also where all of my programs and ebooks are available. So the Ultimate Guide to Body Recomposition is available there. And also you can find my training programs there. So what I can do, if you don't mind, man, I can put up like a 15% discount code for people that use, your podcast name. So would you want me to make it something specific?
Just let's say lean 15. My
Lean
podcast
15.
is Living Lean, so lean 15 is great.
All right, cool. So I'll make it lean 15. So everybody who is tuning into this podcast can check out the Ultimate Guide to Body Recomp for 15% off.
Dope. And again, as someone that has the book, grabbed a couple of your training programs too, actually. Learned so much from all of that. So I will link all this up in the show notes. Of course, I'll have lean 15 in there as well.
Thanks, man.
But again, I can't recommend it enough to everyone listening. I'm sure they have already gathered from listening to this. Like, great resource for learning more about all this, and like you in general, programming, all your research has been so helpful. So again, thank you for coming on, man.
Thanks, man. It's been my pleasure. And last thing, my most active form of social media is on Instagram. So follow me there. It's just my full name at Christopher.Barakat.
Perfect, dude. I'll link all that up in the show notes.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care, guys.